Great Minnesota Northfield Massacre, Raid, Raid, White Dawn, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Wanderers, Breaking the Sound Barrier, altitude records of many types of descriptions. You've flown over 179 different kinds of aircraft, is that correct?
Yeah.
Each of you in your own way has pushed the envelope of science or imagination. Now I've got to ask you, in working together, what were the big surprises you had each about the other? Phil, could I ask you first?
What kind of surprises I had working with him? That he could act.
And he's handsome too, isn't he?
Well,
no pressure on Quaid.
Yeah, don't surprise me here. But,
he has all the charisma in the world. When we see him on screen briefly,
the screen lights up. It's probably the high point of the film, actually, when he comes on and says his line. But I mean, my surprise, actually, it wasn't a negative surprise at all. I mean, it was just a pleasure meeting him and working with him. That was a surprise. I mean, here you have, I had a lot of apprehensions before I met him. Here's a general from the Air Force, and we're doing a movie, and I wanted to do a movie the way I wanted to do it, and so forth. And this guy here couldn't have been more helpful, nicer, and more inspiring to all the cast. We would hang out together in the evenings, and he would start by lecturing these guys on how it was, and end up playing pool and laughing with them, and it was great. Can
I ask you the same thing? Would you have had an evening down at Poncho's, say, with Phil Kaufman? Would he have been somebody who could have come in, you could have drunk with?
When you realize, his credentials, you're darn right. As a lot of movie people did hang around Poncho's, and it was fun going up and meeting Phil in Frisco, because you're in his territory, and he knows everything about really terrific food scrounger. He's really
Tom, you're talking of credentials.
Yeah.
One of the really key scenes to me in the film is during the fan dance number, in which the Mercury astronauts are being entertained down in Texas. Meantime, your character, Sam Shepard, is striving for a new altitude record in a new jet. It's like we are being reminded where the real priorities are. Would either of you comment on that?
Yeah, I think so. Phil, in his marvelous way of putting things together, and it goes around and falls into place, and he pretty well. I was really surprised when I saw how he had placed the cuttings of the NF-104 flight and the Sally Rand fan dancing and the expression on the astronauts' faces. I was real pleased with the way it turned out, and as far as priorities are concerned, he always reminded us all through the film that was your job. He always portrayed that in the film.
It's as if you're seeing Chuck Yeager's the conscience of the whole endeavor.
Right,
and he's out there on the edges, always reminding.
Right. He's they're being given the goodies, so to speak, at that point. They're getting all the rewards from Houston, and they're getting Sally Rand doing her kind of mystifying fan dance. At least it starts out just as a fan dance with all the Texans whooping and whistling. And then pretty soon it gets into a little bit of a strange area, and in a strange kind of metaphorical way, I suppose. I looked on her almost like this kind of goddess of flight with the wing, feathered wings, and she's kind of bringing them back to the reality of their roots, which is what the whole movie is about. The roots of these guys. They were test pilots. They came out of something, and that despite all the goodies and everything that they got, they knew even in that moment there was somebody out there pushing the outside of the envelope.
Ultimately, they remain the team, while you remain the loner, the individualist, I suppose.
Yeah, because that's what you are when you're in a research airplane. You're on your own.
There's an obvious affection for those scenes in the Mojave Desert. Does that, in fact, I was reminded of a Howard Hawks' Only Angels Have Wings kind of setup. Are you a fan of that kind of picture, and are you?
Yes.
That was really one of the bases of that thing. It was meant to be. I felt very strongly about those movies of the 40s and how we lost characters like that in movies. And the character of Chuck Yeager as he is, and as Sam portrayed him, and Barber Hershey is, his wife, really I think harkens back to those movies, and Only Angels Have Wings is a good example.
I think even Tom Wolfe talks about the stunt pilot as a person who straps on his airplane. And we could liken that to maybe a gunfighter strapping on his holster and revolver. I don't know. What do you think of that?
Yeah, we always use the expression, when you strap your fanny to an airplane and take off. That's about the way it goes. Because you have to become a part of the airplane. And you have to have a lot of faith in that equipment, too, because your neck depends on it.
We're really crossing two different kinds of worlds here, filmmaking and spaceflight. Have you ever had a chance to take Philip Kaufman up in a jet?
No, not in a jet. I took him up in a prop airplane. We were out, landed on the dry lake
Would
bed.
you go up with him if he wanted to take you up?
Would I go up with him in a jet? Oh, sure. Of course, one thing he did with that little airplane was we got up a couple hundred feet, gave me the controls and turned the engine off. But it didn't fool me at all. I knew I was with this guy here. What did I say to you? What are we doing now? Then he also took me off, you know, over one of those edges where you suddenly go weightless for a second. Didn't scare me at all, Chuck.
Yeah, sure.
And I bet you couldn't scare me in a jet at all either.
Probably not.
Chuck Yeager, in conclusion, when you see Sam Shepard on the screen as you in 1947, say, were you that handsome then?
Yes, he
Well,
was.
naturally.
He was.
Well,
I mean, it must be an odd feeling to watch yourself portrayed on the screen,
it
generally
is.
speaking.
But you got to look back again, and you know, that was a long time ago, and it was fun recreating those scenes with Sam. You know, he did an excellent job too. In fact, probably a little too good.
The Right Stuff starring, among other people, Dennis Quaid as Gordo Cooper. Let's take a look now at Dennis Quaid, because you're looking at the best darn pilot in the history of aviation, or at least that's how you describe yourself. There's one wonderful moment there, Dennis, where, however, you are asked who the best pilot you've ever seen is, and you almost say Chuck Yeager. Now, in talking with
How do
Gordon
you know?
Cooper, well, it's a sixth sense, I guess. In talking with Gordon Cooper, though, how does he feel about that? Was he as cocky as you are in the film?
Well, maybe not as. All test pilots, I think, have huge egos. I mean, they're like actors and brain surgeons when it comes to that. He's on the exterior, maybe he's not as enthusiastic or as outgoing or cocky as that, but on the on the inside, I think they all have this opinion of themselves. And it's well deserved in a lot of ways because they do a very tough job.
Because among all the players in the film, The Right Stuff, you are the most brash, the most characteristic, I suppose, of the fresh flyboy in the aviation films of the 40s, say, to come out of Hollywood. You have that sort of style to you, and I'm wondering if that's more your contribution or something you picked up from Cooper.
I really, it made it kind of a combination. There's the Gordo Cooper that I met before we started doing the movie. I looked him up, and I took a lot of character things from him as well. And then there's also the Gordo Cooper that's written in the script that I had to go with.
Of course.
And I think all the astronauts, the way they're written in the script, and the way Tom Wolfe portrayed them, are kind of different symbols of a different type of personality of an American stereotype, in other words.
And as contrasted with somebody like Gus Grissom,
Gus
you can
Grissom
sleep
is-
through anything.
Right.
And you do throughout the film, it seems like. At the most odd times of stress, you're able to sleep. And again, I'm wondering if this was characteristic
Well,
of Cooper.
this actually happened. Gordon Cooper was sitting on top of I guess what you call a man-made bomb getting ready to blast off into space, and he fell asleep on the launch pad.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah.
But believable, ultimately, I guess.
Oh, sure. That's the reason I wanted to play him, in fact.
The scenes with your wife are very interesting in the film, too, because she leaves for San Diego. You're at Edwards Air Force Base. It's the one situation in the film where we see a wife leaving the husband. Is there more that was left on the cutting room floor there than what we saw in the finished film?
I'm not too sure. I haven't seen the movie yet. I see it
Really?
tomorrow. Yeah. I'm doing a play in New York right now, so all these screenings that they've been having, I haven't been able to make.
Yeah.
But from what I understand, most of our relationship is left in there.
Okay. Let's talk about your career a bit, too, because with movies like Tough Enough and Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia, Jaws 3D, The Long Riders, you've established yourself relatively quickly, I think, as one of the really solid young actors to come along.
Relatively quickly. I've been out there for 8 years.
Isn't the old story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Among those titles I've mentioned, what are some of the ones that you have been happiest with, personally?
Well, The Right Stuff is the movie that I'm happiest with of everything, all the things that I've done. I think it's my best work. I think it's also the best movie I've ever been in. And The Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia I like for different reasons, and Breaking Away, I think, was another one of my favorites.
A lot of the scenes with Christy McNichol seemingly were improvised in that film, and this is my chance to find out if that were so.
Yeah, it was. There's a lot of improvisation that goes on in films anyway, I think, because a lot of times you have your script, but once you get to a location, you're going to have different circumstances. It's not going to be the same way that it's written. simply because the set is different than what is in the script. And so it requires a lot of improvisation. Also, the relationships change just for the people that you're working with. And a lot of different things will come up, and improvisation helps you to establish that a lot better.
You're how many months away now from the shooting of Right Stuff? How long ago did that complete?
Over a year.
Okay.
About a year and 3 months, and we took 8 months to shoot it.
And in that intervening time, what kinds of projects can we expect to see from you? What have you been working on then?
Oh, well, I did one movie called Dreamscape that's coming out. I don't know when. And it's about psychics. And now I've moved to New York, and I'm doing plays in New York. I'm going to be doing Sam Shepard's True West with my brother downtown in New York.
Ah, so the association will continue on then with
Yeah,
Sam
it's kind of
Shepard.
the Right Stuff connection there.
Yeah. All right. As far as your own work is concerned, do you see yourself as a younger generation actor, or do you see yourself as already an established film personality now?
Established film
Yeah. Are you an
personality?
established
I don't
person, or are you still on the
know. I don't know what
rise?
you mean by established film personality. I don't know. I kind of see myself. I just see myself as an actor. I see as far as the new generation and all that. I kind of see myself in between, kind of generations of the people of the Pacino and Hoffman, those people who have been around for a while, and then the younger generations that's coming up. I kind of see myself in between that.
Yeah. In fact, Dennis, I'm not sure how old you are, but I'm wondering if you remember very vividly any of the events with the Mercury program.
Oh yeah, in fact, that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this movie. In fact, the first reason, because these guys were my boyhood heroes growing up. I was in kindergarten. The teacher comes in, turns on the TV,
Yes.
and there's Alan Shepard going into space. I grew up in Houston, and right then it replaced wanting to be a cowboy. Everybody wanted to be an astronaut.
Well, it is kind of a Western movie in a way, The Right Stuff, isn't
Well,
it?
yeah, I think so. And this is different than most space movies that have been made, like Star Wars or whatever, because that's not for real. That's in the future. That's what makes Right Stuff so great, is that it is a piece of history. It's something we actually done with real heroes. But I think space movies are the new westerns nowadays. Instead of the shootout on the street, you have your spaceships instead of a horse.
And you're very good for that because you've always been an independent sort of character, be it a tough man or a cabaret singer or country bar singer or astronaut.
I like to pick my parts for different reasons. I don't want to kind of pigeonhole myself. So I pick roles that definitely are a lot different from...
Well, tough man, entertainer, and astronaut, they're all rolled into one, certainly, in The Right Stuff. Dennis Quaid, I want to thank you. Wonderful characterization as Gordo Cooper in The Right Stuff from Warner Brothers. Thank you, Dennis. Nice to see you both. And I'm curious if you have had a chance to get to know each other during the filming and how much of that acquaintance paid off then in the eventual film. Lance, you want to take that first?
We met yesterday for the first time.
I see.
Real time. This was Friday. Yeah.
Right.
Is this characteristic then generally across the board in the film, the actors and the astronauts?
No, I think Dennis Quaid met Gordo before he started filming. But I unfortunately only had tapes and film to work from and books.
Well, as Shara, newsmen, television journalists specifically in the film, are portrayed as people who clamber over fences and walls and poke through windows into your lives. And here I am sitting here. How typical has that kind of, well, harassment is what the film seems to be calling it. How typical has that?
Well, that was quite typical in those days. Oddly enough, what many people may not have seen, I have not seen the film The Right Stuff, by the way, but what people don't realize is our homes in Houston were all built with the backyard as an enclosed area. The front was almost opaque to the front street.
My goodness.
Because we anticipated that from our early days in Virginia.
Now, you're the only man to have flown all 3 missions. Gemini,
in
Mercury,
the space world,
and
I'm
Apollo.
unique, yes.
Indeed, and I'm also checking this is the first rendezvous of 2-manned maneuverable spacecraft as well. Now, what has this meant to you as a celebrity, as a man personally, in the intervening years?
Well, since then, of course, I got in your business more than most people. I sat on the left hand of Walter Cronkite. Not many people do that.
Now, does this mean that you're starting to clamber over walls yourself?
No, Walter and I sat and we did watch the launch and watch the flights, of course, from studios. I became a very close friend of Walter's. We still are close friends. Lovely man. He taught me to carry a pencil as you do.
There you go. Of course, there's a style to it,
and tell
especially when you
this
quit
is-
smoking.
And you say, this is the way it is. The man really was a good friend. I have done a number of television chores since then, and it's an interesting world. I found I was more comfortable in front of a camera than I was being chased around by reporters.
Lance, I find this is true sometimes. I at least am more comfortable on camera than off sometimes. As an actor, a person in showbiz now confronting an astronaut world, which do you think you would have been more comfortable with in comparing the two?
Well, there's two kinds off camera. This is real life off camera, and
Well,
then
good.
there's off camera. You know, I can do it in a movie, but this is kind of different to be sitting here with Wallace Sharar.
Let me address both of you with a question generally about the right stuff. It does seem so much like a Western. It does begin and end, after all, in the American Southwest. Astronauts and stunt pilots as individualists, maybe even loners. Do you see it that way? Do you see it as a Western?
No.
Not science fiction at all, but a
I have
Western.
not seen the film.
No,
The book
I don't-
wouldn't
I
portray
don't.
that way at all.
Generally, yeah.
No.
In fact, if that's the representation of the film, they've missed the train completely.
Yeah, no, it's not like that. It's
We were definitely team players. That's why you'll see individuals come out of, possibly it does in the film too, as I say, I haven't seen it. You'll see individuals come out of the pack. A lot of us who stayed in the program through it all were truly team players. When the team got too large to stay on the team, some of us went off to do other things. The concept of what an astronaut is a team player, not a loner.
Well, that's exactly what I felt doing it. I tell
Yeah,
you,
I was
really.
going to ask you if you saw any parallels between the whole team
Tremendous
concept
parallels.
and an acting
It
ensemble.
is a team. The acting ensemble was so strong that way that we could tell how a guy was feeling when he came on the set that morning and what to do about it. It was, we encompassed each other pretty much. It was very much a team effort.
Something else the film seems to be saying is when the bottom line is reached, yes, you are involved in hurtling pieces of metal and scientific procedures, but the end result of it all is that you still have to function as an individual, whether you're in a rocket or whether you're in an airplane or a jet. Do you see that as still, is space travel for the individual, or is it for the team
I
player
enjoyed
more?
the best part of coming back. Assuming many people ask the question, the typical line when I go somewhere is, what was it like to go to the moon? And I say, and come back. And they forget about that. Of course, the individual does want to live through the mission. And I think that's why I was a perfectionist about the role I played as a living astronaut. I very seriously wanted the thing to work right. But I also realized that, and I hate to use this team thing over and over again, I depended upon so many people to do these chores. And there were a lot of chores to be done. If that's, I'm sure that if you caught that, you've done a good job.
Oh, I did. I remember a tape I listened to of Wally in his flight, during his flight. And the first thing he did was thank everybody for putting this bear together. I remember that.
Yeah.
It was, and so the team effort was throughout the Mercury program,
So
certainly.
you had access then to materials in which you could study your role model.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. As
How
much as I
extensive
could get.
Was that more of a voluntary thing, or was that provided to you by the filmmakers?
You couldn't make a movie like this without doing that. I mean, I remember spending 12, 15 hours in a room listening to tapes and seeing videos and anything we could get on the whole program, because we didn't want to walk in there and not have a detail that was missing if we could possibly do it, you know.
If either of you had a chance to switch roles, would you become a film actor or give it a shot? Would you give it a shot to go up in orbit or something?
I'd ride on the shuttle, but I wouldn't have ridden the Mercury capsule, no.
As I look back at the Mercury, either way, it's pretty small. No, I don't think I want to be in the acting world. It's much like I wouldn't want to be in the political world. I deal with facts as an engineer and as something of a scientist. The transition's impossible. Fantasy in that sense, and that's what an actor has to do, is project some kind of fantasy to entertain. There are very few documentary films sell, I know that.
When you're up in space, to me the parallel with the Western might break down too, because you're so confined. This is a question I've always wanted to ask an astronaut. How do you deal with potential claustrophobia?
We were pre-selected in the sense that we were, most of us at least, were fighter pilots.
But until it really happens, how do you know how you will react? I mean,
No,
is there any certainty?
you evolve into being a fighter pilot. This is what I thought Tom Wolfe caught that quite well, ascending the pyramid. Some people go into transports, some go into fighters, and those who get into transports have lots of room, so they're not worried about claustrophobia. Those who get into the fighter world, if they can handle it, will stay in the fighter world. It's a very confined, small cockpit. Tom wrote a line I liked very much. We strap an airplane on.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
And that means you're pre-selected then to deal with claustrophobia.
Up, Up, and Away with Wally Schirra and Lance Henriksen, both of them starring in The Right Stuff, a Lad Company released through Warner Brothers. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.
Best to both of you. Both of you have some key scenes in the film that tell us, I think, not just about you, but about your husbands as well. For example, Barbara Hershey with Sam Shepard as Chuck Yeager. You tell him, don't live in the past. If you do, I'm going out the door. I'm curious about your interpretation of a scene like that.
Well, part of the interesting aspect of that scene is what goes right before it. She says, right before that, she says, you know, I always hated flying. And that is quite a blow, and quite a shocking thing to say to a man who I mean, she's never said that to, whose whole life is flying. By the way, after 15 years of marriage, I've never told you this, but I always hated flying. Yet, even though I hated flying, because that's who you are, if you don't do what you're supposed to do with your life, I'm leaving. And there's a great polar wisdom to that. She's feeling both things. She's feeling her own, what she goes through, her own terror at him going up and doing that. At the same time, that's so much who he is that if he isn't that, it's nothing that she can respect. She wouldn't stay with him. So the dichotomy in there, to me, is what's beautiful.
And there's a fierceness of your own independence there too. I mean,
yes.
we mustn't forget that as
oh,
well.
No.
Now, as Betty Grissom, Veronica Cartwright, your scene in which I think there's a similar kind of revelation here is after Gus's problems with the press and the PR hype after his space flight has not been what at least you hoped it would be. You wanted to talk to Jackie Kennedy. You wanted the kind of celebrity status that the other astronaut had had. I'd like to hear more about that scene as you interpreted that.
Well, I think, yes, Betty does want to meet Jackie, and...
Who doesn't?
I mean, after all, that was the era. Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, I think she's also saying to him, hey, you deserve better. You've gone through this. You've risked your life constantly for these people. And here you have gone out and been spamming a can and gone up into space, and by no fault of his own, which she's not, you know, it's like that asking question, did you blow it or didn't you blow it? She just, which he didn't blow, and he lands that capsule and it sinks. That shouldn't make any difference. They're more interested in saving a piece of machinery and not picking up on the thing that he has done. And he's worked so long for them, he deserves it too.
And the two of you have to face the press immediately after that moment and put the smiles back on and all of that, whereas you and Chuck Yeager, your character with Chuck Yeager, never have to face that, really. So there's quite a contrast
There's
here.
quite a contrast, but also the other half of that irony is Chuck never gets the press. I mean, right now, at this point in his life, but it's, no, he doesn't. But at the same time, to break the sound barrier is certainly equally heroic. And they hushed it up. That's part of the irony of the film. I mean, and he never got any press. Of course, now he is. But
let's stay with the press too, if I may, because they are clambering over walls and coming through your windows and the whole thing. I'm curious if in your own lives as actresses you find all too many parallels with that sort of situation. Let's just ask both of you generally.
Well, from Betty's point of view, she was just so thrilled for the, I mean, here's a woman who sat and waited for her husband coming home, you know, and you never know, in months and weeks at a time they're gone and they're working, and oh my gosh, here all of a sudden you're something that's important. And the press has created that. They've put you on Life magazine. Betty loved it.
But now personally though, as actresses personally with families, home lives, you are gone from those things many times, and do you find a parallel, and do you like that separateness, that celebrity attention?
Sure, I think it's part of the job.
On a one-to-one basis I like it at the right time, but I don't like it in terms of that kind of monster that was depicted in, you know, I've never,
but I haven't really experienced.
I haven't dealt with, like, you know, Natalie Wood's funeral, them sitting in the trees. I haven't dealt with that kind of press, if that's
now I have this pocket camera here. No, I'm just kidding. Both of you have worked with people in this film before. You've worked with Philip Kaufman before in Invasion of the Body
And
Snatchers.
also Jeff Goldblum, who's in the
Oh,
movie.
of course, yes.
He was my husband in Body Snatchers.
And in The Baby Maker, or
Yes.
The Rainmaker.
No, Baby
The
Maker.
Baby Maker, that's another film.
Whatever.
The Baby Maker with Sam Shepard.
No, with Scott Glenn.
I'm sorry, Scott
The
Glenn.
parallel in all the names is too funny anyway.
With
but
Glenn, yeah. But reuniting, was it that? Or is it just a case of you hadn't seen each other in all of these years in both your situations? Or had you kept tabs?
Oh, yes, I love Phil. I think he's an absolutely terrific person. I think he's a wonderful director, and I think he cares about the people that he works with. And so it was great to see him again, and you do keep contact with people that you care about.
Was that the case with Scott Glenn then?
No, I didn't even see Scott Glenn. I'm in an entirely different section of the film. Today was the first time I've seen Scott Glenn in a long time.
We do forget, of course, the
yeah.
mechanics of filmmaking.
Yeah.
It would have
I
separated.
mean, the Right Stuff shot over a very long period, and he wasn't at all in the section I was in.
Incidentally, I've just now heard about your reception of the award for The Entity at a film festival in France. I want to congratulate you,
thank you
on that. Other remarkable film, generally.
Thanks a lot.
Science fiction fantasy. This one is not science fiction, of course. This is reality. But I'm curious if in either of your cases you have enjoyed science fiction or enjoyed following space flight over the years, that kind of thing. And maybe comments on Sally Ride's recent achievement.
Right.
Incidentally, the first mom in space will go up shortly, too, I understand. I forget the lady's name, but women are now much more of a visible part of the astronaut.
Well, what's
thing.
really nice is that somebody, you know, like Sally Ride gets the opportunity to do it. I mean, she's just as educated, she worked just as hard, and she's amazing in her field, and it's just... I mean, I don't think she wanted to be recognized as being the first woman in space.
Exactly.
She's doing a job, and that is really nice to be accepted for that.
It's so pointed up is an indication that we still, you know, it's still not a natural thing yet to send women into space. When it's not talked about, I think that's when it'll really be a piece of our culture.
I have just enough time left to ask you finally, if you were asked to strap on a piece of metal and go up into orbit, would you do it? Either of you?
I would have before I had a son. Now I don't know. Now I have a
Does
child.
change the priorities, doesn't it?
Things, yeah.
Veronica?
I'd probably do it.
All right.
What the hell?
All right. Good note to conclude on.
First
Veronica,
actress in space.
there you go.
Hey, and a woman to boot.
I'm going to be the first TV journalist in space if I don't get out of here. Our time is up. Veronica Cartwright as Betty Grissom, Barbara Hershey as glamorous Glennis Yeager in The Right Stuff, a Lad Company released through Warner Brothers. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Welcome, gentlemen, or should I welcome myself since I've come to see you. You both of you are very different kinds of characters in The Right Stuff, it would seem to me. You seem to be the most fiercely individualistic as Alan Shepard. I mean, you're just going to lead your own life, as you tell John Glenn, and woe be unto anybody who interrupts you in it. Have you had a chance to talk to Alan Shepard? Did you work out that kind of direction together?
No, not at all. I did a lot of research work in terms of looking at taped NASA newsreel footage, that kind of stuff. Talked to a lot of people who worked with him through the NASA, throughout the space program, and read a lot of stuff about him, but I never talked to him personally at all.
Okay. Fred Ward, in dealing with Gus Grissom, obviously you have not had a chance to talk to him. He's gone now, and in many ways he's the most tragic, I think, of the astronauts. Your moment in which Grissom faces up to some inner panic, there's the controversy about the loss of the capsule, to me was one of the most terrifying in the film. In being strapped into all that metal yourself, did you begin to feel some of that claustrophobia in shooting those scenes, I wonder?
Well,
it's all too convincing.
Yeah, there was a point when we were shooting the stuff in the water that I was waiting for a shot in the capsule, lying on my back, and the water was creeping in.
Right.
I kept checking
Suddenly
the doors
method
that I
is-
could make sure I could get out. And there was a funny incident that happened where Phil and I were on the barge and talking about the shot to be, up and coming shot, and the capsule actually sunk.
Really?
Yeah, we looked around. So immediately I went to the stuntmen and learned how to use one of those scuba diver bottles. I was going under, I wanted to breathe a bit, yeah.
I'd like to ask both of you, too, to relate your characters and relate yourselves personally, if you would, to the invasion of the press in your lives. Here I am, for heaven's sake. And in the movie, the press are crawling over your windowsills and bothering everybody. Can you relate to that personally, as well as professionally, maybe?
Well, I can't on that level because I don't feel like I'm being invaded. You know, I'm flown here and put up and then sitting here and talking to you, for a few minutes. I don't feel like
Scott,
being invaded.
want to comment on that?
No, like Fred said, you want to take the ride, you got to pay for the ticket, and that's part of being an actor. I am every now and then reminded of something that Marlon Brando said a long time ago, which he was asked, don't you feel like you're kind of strange when you're acting, you're putting on makeup and an accent and a costume, do you feel like you're being a little bit dishonest? And he said, no, actors are most honest when they're acting. You want to see an actor be dishonest, get him on a talk show or in an interview.
Well, I don't want to force what I see as a bit of a similarity, but let me throw it out here anyway. Both of you seem to have roles that display a capacity each of you have for a lot of inner intensity. Personal best, too, I recall that. It was a wonderful part of that film. In this film, both of you convey that. Is this something about your own styles, those things that make you good at what you do, that you yourself are aware of? Sense of almost nervousness, tightness, tenseness inside. Is it fair to see those things? Do you see them yourselves?
Well, I can't be the judge of that. I mean, you can't sort of divorce yourself and become objective.
Have the people that you have worked with, have they talked with you about that? Say a Robert Towne or a Roberto Rossellini, and you've worked with Sam Shepard before too.
Yes, right.
What do they tell you about yourselves as actors, if anything?
Well, I've found that directors don't really try to make that self-conscious, I think it would make one self-conscious if you start pointing out.
So you'd almost maybe avoid knowing too much of that, huh?
I don't think it's a matter of avoiding it. It's just a matter of taking care of business, And
Yeah, it's other stuff. Bob Towne, for instance, just addressed himself to me in terms of trying to find places in my own life situations that parallel the characters, but in terms of impact, what kind of an actor you are. I mean, when you talk to a musician about playing a piece, you talk about the piece, not the fact that he hits a great high C.
Let's talk about careers that might have been, for example, dealing with the right stuff again. Can you see anything in your backgrounds that might have pointed you towards an astronaut kind of training? Would you yourselves have been willing to have done those kinds of things, do you think?
Well, I think I would have been willing to had the circumstances in my life led to that, but they didn't. I didn't have any aspirations either. So.
Had you had the opportunity, would you have wanted to go for it?
Yeah, but that's predicated on a number of things that I'm not, which is I'm a terrible mathematician. I have no engineering ability at all. I mean.
Well, indeed, Shepard comes across.
But if you're
as
talking
kind of
about
maverick,
if you're talking about doing something where you had an opportunity to experience a good long adrenaline rush, sure.
Okay. It's a Western in some respects. That's been pointed out. Maybe it's all too obvious to say that. But do you like Westerns? Do you like science fiction films? Space travel generally? Are these all things that you've grown up with and found interesting? Either?
Well, I'm not crazy about science fiction, but I think, Western's is part of our mythology, and this touches that.
Yeah, I'd agree.
And have you had any feedback from Alan Shepard yet about the film?
None at all.
Do you expect to have any, or what?
I don't have any idea.
It seems interesting to me to be in a position where you are a part of a myth, in a way. The astronauts already are far enough away in history, I suppose, that we tend to make them larger than life. Do you think maybe you are contributing to that now?
I think they were made larger than life when it was happening as well, with the press and the publicity and the competition with the Russians and what we, looked up to them for.
On your own.
There's an obvious affection for those scenes in the Mojave Desert. Does that, in fact, I was reminded of a Howard Hawks' Only Angels Have Wings kind of setup. Are you a fan of that kind of picture, and are you?
Yes, yes.
That was really one of the bases of that thing, It was meant to be. I felt very strongly about those movies of the 40s and how we lost characters like that in movies. And the character of Chuck Yeager as he is, and as Sam portrayed him, and Barber Hershey as his wife, really, I think, harkens back to those movies, and Only Angels Have Wings is a good example.
I think even Tom Wolfe talks about the stunt pilot as a person who straps on his airplane And we could liken that to maybe a gunfighter strapping on his holster and revolver. I don't know. What do you think of that?
Yeah, we always use the expression, when you strap your fanny to an airplane and take off. That's about the way it goes. Because you have to become a part of the airplane, and you have to have a lot of faith in that equipment too, because see, your neck depends on it.
We're really crossing two.
Yeah, really terrific food scrounger. He's really.
These are talking of credentials.
Yeah.
One of the really key scenes to me in the film is during the fan dance number in which the Mercury astronauts are being entertained down in Texas. Meantime, your character, Sam Shepard, is striving for a new altitude record in a new jet. It's like we are being reminded where the real priorities are. Would either of you comment on that?
Yeah, I think so. Phil, in his marvelous way of putting things together, and it goes around and falls into place, and he pretty well. I was really surprised when I saw how he had placed the cuttings of the NF-104 flight and the Sally Rand fan dancing and the expression on the astronauts' faces. I was real pleased with the way it turned out. And as far as priorities are concerned, he always reminded us all through the film that was your job. He always portrayed that in the film.
It's as if you're seeing Chuck Yeager's.
But, I mean, my surprise, actually, it wasn't a negative surprise at all. I mean, it was just a pleasure meeting him and working with him. That was a surprise. I mean, here you have, I had a lot of apprehensions before I met him. Here's a general from the Air Force, and, we're doing a movie, and I wanted to do a movie the way I wanted to do it and so forth. And this guy here couldn't have been more helpful, nicer, and more inspiring to all the cast. We would hang out together in the evenings, and he would start by lecturing these guys on how it was, and end up playing pool and laughing with them, and it was great. That was.
Can I ask you the same thing? Would you have had an evening down at Poncho's, say, with Phil Kaufman? Would he have been somebody who could have come in, you could have drunk with?
When you realize, his credentials, you're darn right. As a lot of movie people did hang around Poncho's, and it was fun going up and meeting Phil in Frisco, because you're in his territory, and he knows everything about
Great Minnesota Northfield Massacre Raid, White Dawn, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Wanderers, Breaking the Sound Barrier, altitude records of many types of descriptions. You've flown over 179 different kinds of aircraft, is that correct?
Yeah.
Each of you in your own way has pushed the envelope of science or imagination. Now I've got to ask you, in working together, what were the big surprises you had each about the other? Phil, could I ask you first?
What kind of surprises I had working with him? That he could act.
And he's handsome too, isn't he?
Well, but,
no pressure about Quaid.
Yeah, don't surprise me here. But,
he has all the charisma in the world. When we see him on screen briefly,
the screen lights up. It's probably the high point of the film, actually, when he comes on and says his line.
The conscience of the whole endeavor.
Right,
He's
exactly.
out there on the edges, always reminding.
Right. He's they're being given the goodies, so to speak, at that point. They're getting all the rewards from Houston. And they're getting Sally Rand doing her kind of mystifying fan dance. At least it starts out just as a fan dance with all the Texans whooping and whistling. And then pretty soon it gets into a little bit of a strange area, and in a strange kind of metaphorical way, I suppose. I looked on her almost like this kind of goddess of flight with the wing, feathered wings, and she's kind of bringing them back to the reality of their roots, which is what the whole movie is about. The roots of these guys. They were test pilots. They came out of something, and that despite all the goodies and everything that they got, they knew even in that moment there was somebody out there pushing the outside of the envelope.
Ultimately, they remain the team, while you remain the loner, the individualist, I suppose.
Yeah, because that's what you are when you're in a research airplane. You're on